Welcome to a new lens with CommonGood Capital, where we talk with investors, RIAs, fund managers, and philanthropists about their experience within different impact investing themes, as well as explore the power of stewardship and capital. Today is a special show because I've never had two people on at one time. And you'll see that both of these guests, their lives intertwine. So it's going to be, in fact, we'll see if you all correct the other person in how they answer different questions. So with me today is JaQ Campbell, founder and CEO of Alexander Legacy Private Wealth Management. Before she started this, she had a very successful corporate career. She decided to pursue her true passion, which was to establish a firm where advisors could be part of a culture and community that is mission-based and values-aligned. JaQ's passion is being a MIP, mother, innovator, and philanthropist. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
So glad to be here, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me.
And next, we've got Hope Lovell, senior advisor with you all, or with your team, Alexander Legacy Private Wealth Management. But Hope also is a seasoned executive and board member with almost 20 years of experience in running an accredited nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide housing and services to adults with disabilities. A strong believer in community development, Hope is an advocate for social enterprises that serve the greater good. And then for full transparency, we all had the pleasure to be in Africa together to look at the landscape of different investment opportunities, as well as what some of the nonprofits were doing on the ground there. So we have a very kindred spirit after being on the ground in Africa for a week. So thank you both for joining. So I don't know how we'll start. We're going to play this out. So my first question, and JaQ, let's start with you. My first question, and then we'll switch over to Hope. So maybe if you go shorter on these, and then we'll intertwine it because some of your history intertwines. Give us a little background on where you went to school and just high level quick of your career.
Yeah. So, of course, Detroit, we just talked about the incredible Lions. And so my family's been here for 75 years on the Alexander side. So, definitely a proud Detroiter. But we also grew up in a suburb. Really, my childhood was spent in an area called Southfield, Michigan, which we'll talk about later. But definitely an area that truly opened my eyes to what I like to say, just sort of that true middle class wealth. And so at an early age, I started to really embark upon what impact and wealth looked like. So that's, a little bit about where I grew up. And, that's how I met my dear friend and colleague, Hope here. We'll talk about that big wheel and that Jerry curl later. It was cute. I was like, I want one of those, Mama. Come on. And from there, here we are.
So tell me a little about
your bullet, JaQ.
So tell me a little bit about your career, just so we get a sense of how you're coming to us today.
Yeah. So, my career, really, my mother, God bless her, she's a CPA, and so growing up, Hope would tell you, we had, debits and credits all over the basement, and, naturally I knew I was going to be in some type of business field. And I thought I was going to be an accountant until I started realizing, oh my God, this is like kryptonite for me because I'm much more of a, not that I don't like the numbers and the accountants. Sure. I love you all. However, for me, it was like, I want to be out in the field. I want to develop relationships. And so I fell in love with more of the relationship side of the business, was introduced to wealth management in, the late 90s. And then once I learned really, wow, just really how capital markets were starting to form. And that's just, again, back when we just had stocks, bonds, and we were barely in the ETF market. And now to see what's been happening 30 plus years later, that was really intriguing for me. My path really was my mother who helped me get a co-op experience through high school. It was an internship that I was able to get through my public school in Southfield. And, honestly, from there, I went to go graduate high school, and instead of going off to college, I asked them to, stick on full time. And I said, hey, I got a deal for you guys. They're like, what? I said, I'll stick on full time as long as you pay me well and pay my tuition. And so I dare to say, I like to say I graduated with a VP title, no student loan debt, and a portfolio. So it was a little bit of a longer path, but a much more intentional path. That's really what led me to my pathway today.
So Hope, tell us a little about where you grew up, and maybe you can start to share how your two worlds also, I guess, were on the same path or similar paths along the way as well, and how you're different too.
Yes. Was raised by an educator and an entrepreneur. And so JaQ and I, we grew up about 4 houses down from each other. And my mother was really big on like, okay, Hope, do something good, but make some money. And so she told me at an early age, I want you to grow up and be a doctor. And so I entered college, pre-med, ready to become the next cardiovascular surgeon until I ran into a neurobiology class and blood was everywhere. And I was like, this isn't going to work. And so I still remember that phone call to my parents telling them I am not about to be a doctor. And my father was so very understanding. He said, well, Hope, you've been around business all your life. Why don't you consider, business? And interestingly enough, I hadn't considered business. And so that was kind of like my first foray into it. I graduated from college right in the middle in 2000. So in that tech boom where people were coming out, starting their businesses, making millions. And I was like, yes, Wall Street, here I come. And as it was, I didn't end up on Wall Street. I ended up on LaSalle Street in Chicago. And so JaQ was already there working in banking. And so I got a job with the bank there and we worked right up the street from each other once again. Our paths came back together and we started, I'll share with you, but we started on this path of wealth creation together as two 20-year-old girls in financial services and trying to figure those things out for our families and saying, hey, we came from people who were hard workers and focused on doing good, but how do we kind of personalize that? And so our paths came together when we bought our first house together. That was a duplex and we became investors together.
Very cool. And so then how long ago was that? 20 years ago?
Well, you're trying to age us.
Okay, all right.
It's like 22 though.
Give or take.
Okay.
Yeah,
so then
more than 20.
Have you all continued to invest in things together along this journey?
We're on the journey. We're investing in Alexander Legacy together.
And building businesses and building communities together. And yes, we continue to do that. And JaQ has even
had a
part
trucking
of my
company
board for the nonprofit. I think together it's kind of helping to create this story around wealth equity, health equity, providing services and opportunities and access for people in communities that are socioeconomically disadvantaged.
Yeah, as I'm sitting here listening to you all and seeing you, normally it's one guest and they tell their story. And so what's really cool is that you're on here together, which obviously shows that you all, in whatever capacities, have been linked arm in arm. And so today, what are you doing today together? Maybe start with that.
A lot of things. Hope and I like to say when we get together, we build 24 businesses in 24 hours, right? And so call it the lab, cooking up ideas and thought, whether it's to how we're going to deepen the work that we're doing together at Alexander Legacy, at Lovejoy, and then just kind of even outside of that, we've also developed a program called Launch to Legacy, which we can talk about in a few, that really just sort of brings our passion, our love, and our true dedication to helping more people, especially women and people of color who have been really disenfranchised from the world of investing and the world of just having access, and so really our goal, and most of the time that I spent in corporate America was really advocating for opening up doors, providing excellent, we like to say 6-figure income, 7-figure net worths, right? The goal is, once you can help someone earn a nice healthy 6-figure income, doing what they love, making an impact in clients' lives, then for themselves, I know because I'm a living testimony, you can create that 7-figure net worth. You can think like an investor. You're around investors. And so now you start to say, wow, this is really possible. How can I multiply this? Right? How can I take this and really just take it to the next level? So that's where Hope and I really have a strong passion for. We have a passion for really helping the underserved. She says she works with people who have disabilities. Her work in healthcare, her work in education precedes her. And then now when we think about the wealth gap and we think about, I just think about some of the things that are happening right now around healthcare costs and, some of the tragedies that are happening potentially out there because people are choosing between, do I live or do I pay for food? Right. And so those, like when we were just at a meeting where if we could think about how to solve for bringing fuel costs down, bringing the average cost of food down, sustain, we talked about how to sustain food, how to solar. We're going to get into some of that. We've got to think if we're going to create a world of peace and love and joy and ministry. That's where hope, and I know one thing about me, hope, we may have been neighbors, we may have went to school together, we may have worked together, this, that, and the third, but we also share in our faith and our love for God and for the fact that our calling is bigger than just creating a paycheck for ourselves. Our calling is really using our gifts, our talents, and our purpose to create and make the world a better place. So as we are on this mission, yes, there's frameworks, like Alexander Legacy and Love, Joy, and all the things. But really, what's underneath that? What's underneath the hood are two women who love the Lord, who want to serve him in the best way we can and want to do it in a way that we make a global impact.
And I would just like to piggyback on that. I would say, even as we think about it, we are families building up families, and it's families, even if we talk about community development and having the impact to be able to change communities. When you peel that back, it's people coming together. It's your family coming together with another family. Even the nonprofit that I started, it was started along with my mother and I. And so the thing that I would just hope that people take from this is just thinking about the power of partnership, and that when two or more come together, the exponential impact that you can have beyond just trying to go at it by yourself. There's an African proverb that says that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, take someone with you. And even as we piggyback that into whether it is in the wealth management space and helping families accumulate wealth for their next generation, or it's looking at housing and providing access and shelter and safety. It's building that family core and coming together any way you can to build up the core and then outward into the whole community.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm anxious to get to some of our experience in Africa because I want to pick your brain a little bit. But before I do that, in light of, and Hope, maybe we'll start with you. So here's a question I often ask our guests is, how would you best describe where you're at in your life journey?
Who I am in this point in my life, I'm trying to be a game changer. I'm trying to take the skills, the experiences that I've had from 20 years of leadership and working with people and figure that out, how to take it just from a single company to basically impacting industries and communities. And I'm trying to be a game changer. I mean, let's just say, coming from Detroit, I think we have a great story there. And so we're just trying to take that same level of grit and that innovation and that passion and seeing how we can have positive impact beyond just our direct community, but into other communities, even globally.
Hope, when you're talking and you just mentioned Detroit and previous to that, you mentioned community. What's interesting is, and we all know it, is that part of who you are and this grit comes from Detroit. It comes from the community that you grew up with. So I'd love to hear you reference that and to say, I'm going to leverage partly who I have become because of the community that I've been surrounded with. And it gives you a very unique, quote unquote, competitive advantage. So JaQ, same question for you. How would you describe who you are in the context of where you're going in your life journey?
Well, it's funny because I have this shirt on right now. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if our guests can see it, but it's this JaQ. But on the back of my shirt, I don't know if you can see that, was Born Purposeful. And that was me as a baby. And I had these shirts printed 7 years ago in 2017 when it was my 40th birthday. And one of the things I knew back then, I didn't know, but one of the gifts God gave me was the gift of being a visionary. And really, I started this whole purpose journey. And I started it actually Christmas Day, 12/25, of course, December 25th, 2016. because my birthday is exactly 40 days after Christmas. So I decided to do a 40-day fast and read Purpose Driven Life, which is the 40-day commitment. And it was going to take me all the way up to my 40th birthday. So I did this sort of 40-day experience because I kept hearing the Holy Spirit say, there's about to be a major shift happening in the atmosphere. And I didn't really know at that point what the shift was. We can get into that later because it's been a whole lot that has happened in my life in this last 7 years, from death to divorce to new babies to new jobs to leaving Wall Street. I mean, all the things, right? Everything that could have happened in the last 7 years. But in that moment, everything was cool runnings until, I saw what was happening was I was being prepared for a purpose-driven life. So there was about to be a true sort of breakdown of the life that I was holding on to because it looked safe. It felt safe, but it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing, right, with my life. Because if that was the case, God would not have been making it so apparent that it was time for me to exit stage left and move truly into the world of purpose-driven work. And so I say that to say, I remember bringing that to my bosses back then, and they thought I was being fluffy. Oh, JaQ, here she is, always trying to, be all happy. That's kind of banned on Wall Street, I think, back then. I actually want people to have a purpose and be happy with their work, and smile coming in. Because I would go to work and Jeff, I would see the Grim Reaper. And it would feel like some days the Grim Reaper would walk on the floor. And it was, sometimes that was me, right? I was the Grim Reaper. And so all that being said, I knew that my life journey was to figure out how to truly walk in my purpose and to follow the calling that God had placed on my life, and not to operate in a scarcity or lack mentality because I'm scared because I won't be able to do this, that, and the third. But that if God is going to, if he gives you the vision, he's going to give you the provision. And so really knowing that, even through all the things that I've gone through in the 7 years, I'm still here. We're about to be 4 years old next month. And it's because, right, of that faith walk. And so I'm on a faith walk right now. As we stand, I'm on a legit faith walk. Yep. And I'm just allowing God to do what he does best.
So in that context, and I don't know where this is going to go, just to signify where you are, both of you are at, on your own, you decided to come to Africa with us. You paid your own way. You took the time out. It's not an insignificant trip. So I'm curious how that trip plays into who you are or who you're trying to become for both of you.
A few years ago during COVID, I had this very earth-shattering, core-shaking moment when I walked into a grocery store and there was no food. And it shook me because I realized that the food insecurity is not just for poor people. We kind of think of the food insecure. We're like, oh, it's unfortunately, they don't have enough money to pay for food. When I walked into that grocery store, it had nothing to do with how much money I had or didn't have in my pocket. The supply chain broke. And at the time, I didn't realize that. All I knew was there was no pepper, all the things that you think you go in, and we take food availability for granted. And as a mother, as a provider and caregiver, I take care of a lot of different people, even from an organizational standpoint. It was kind of like there was this feeling of loss of control. And so I set upon this path of trying to understand how to address this problem around food insecurity. And that led me into really understanding and getting an appreciation around looking at the problems that's approaching us with the earth, whether it's with our land, with our air, and our access to water. And, I know we were going to talk about stewardship, but it was at that point when I was like, what kind of stewards? I'm responsible for people. And I knew I had a responsibility to them. And I'm like, okay, we are giving these wonderful resources. And I just wanted to, at that point, figure out how to be better, how to make sure that other people had access to food. It's not just about my family, it's about other families, food, land, water, air, clean air. And so just going through and learning about that, now I'm passionate to say, how can we build the land? How can we re-look at how we're building communities and build circular economies to make sure that we're more conscious about how we deal with waste. We're more conscious around what we are doing and how we're polluting our air. We're more conscious around our farming practices and building up the soil versus depleting the soil, treating the soil in such a way where it really can kind of sequester carbon and pull the pollutant. Like if we can really appreciate this whole circle of life thing, then that's how we as a human race can continue on. And so that's my question. You asked what I want to do. I want to be able to build these economies and I want to help people achieve this goal of regenerative living.
So when you were in Africa, did you see anything there that you want to bring back to the United States, bring back to America, whether it's a practice, whether it's to share with others, anything that fits with what you just said?
Absolutely. The trip to Rwanda was a game changer. I'll be honest, initially I went to Rwanda with thought of superiority of thought as an American going to, and say, a third world, an African country, like, oh, I heard like, oh, the African, we're going to go and we're going to help them out. But I really believe that that experience gave me more than, say, what I was bringing. And one of the things that immediately struck me was their appreciation for their land and how they looked at waste, and they respect their land so much that even when we had stopped in the airport of Amsterdam and the lady looked at my boarding pass and said, "Oh, you're going to Rwanda. They don't allow plastic bags there. Let me get you the biodegradable version of the bag." And I was like, wow, they have taken something where they have a conviction about how they are going to treat their community and around sustainability and regenerative living, that they have now upheld it as a whole community to say, we're not going to pollute. We're going to be intentional about how we're harvesting water. We're going to be intentional around how we're treating our land. And we are going to also set a standard for tourists, whether you're coming to visit for a day or week or however that looks, but you're not going to come in here and pollute our country. That is something that I think that we as Americans, we are so wasteful. We use stuff once and whoop, we don't think about it. I would love for us as Americans to take that level of intentionality and passion for our land and bring it here.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is for those who know about Rwanda, as an example, you probably know the genocide, probably know the movie Hotel Rwanda. And so at one level, probably in our minds is, wait, these people, look at they were civil war with themselves or actually a genocide with themselves. What can we learn from them? And then you get over there and you're like, wait a second, there's actually a lot that we can learn. And it really is a story of ashes to beauty. So, Jax, when you were over there, how did Africa play into your whole kind of journey and where you're at?
So I don't want this to feel like it's obvious, but I'm going to say the obvious thing for me was that I've ran my DNA several times, and literally 35% of my DNA comes from East Africa. And so for me, I felt drawn to saying, okay, that's home. That was the initial thing that attracted me. That, again, if I were really being honest, when I was a little girl, all we would see would be commercials with the you can give $1 a day, and you saw Africans like in a really bad state, flies running around the belly. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to probably visit Africa in my life. I mean, that literally, because that's what was positioned. Fast forward now, social media, people traveling more, so on and so forth. And I'm like, I want to go see my home. This is where I've got ancestors over here. And so I think that was the motivator. A year ago, Hope and I actually we experienced Accra. We spent some time in Accra, Ghana, and Kumasi. And I mean, just being on the continent of Africa, there's just like when they say it's the mother, it is like a love. It is truly a love. So now take that then even further into Rwanda. Like Hope said, I mean, I didn't know. I was going in with an open mind. I'm like, look, I'm here for it, right? At the end of the day, like, let's go. And I will tell you, with every bone in my body, I was completely blown away. Everything Hope said. And then I would add to the fact that, I felt safe, which is very important, right? Especially, if we're going into areas that we want to explore both on investment side, whether it's living, giving, investing, we want to feel that sense of community. Oh my God, how we felt that from the orphanages to the different talks that we had at the various facilities that we got to visit. I mean, just everybody's story of impact that warmed my heart, and it was just genuine. It was real. And then what I really loved was the young people, just the fact that the young people are over there. Like, I was like in the car, the girls had their heels on with their little briefcases, and they on the back of those scooters. They like, we getting the word boo boo. I was so, because Hope and I, we were, little young 20 somethings running around with our little briefcases and our little suits, And so it was so inspiring to see just how young, but yet just the grit, we'll go back to that word grit. Yeah. I saw grit, a meek spirit. I love their spirit of meekness too. It was like, you just want to hug on them and you just want to serve. And so I would say, definitely one of the things I took the workforce over there. I just felt connected to that workforce. And it was almost to the point where I'm like, I want to come over here and really adopt, for lack of better words, communities and really teach them this work, because we got a whole community there that can do the work. Like Hope said, like we can go together. And now there's this a budding workforce that I think really benefit from the things that, Hope and I bring to the table. So that's what excited me about the experience.
There's one other thing too. I wanted to just say the thing that struck me was the unity, knowing that they had that horrible genocide in the 90s. Fast forward to learn that it's like illegal to talk about whether you're Hutu or you're Tutsi. It used to be on their license, but now everyone just identifies as Rwandan. And I think as Americans, many times we focus on our differences, whether you're Black or you're white or you're Republican or you're Democratic or you urban or rural. And it's just to remember that we're all Americans and we need to come together. And like Rwanda, they've come together and they are just doing some awesome things with their country, and they're building up their younger and their next generation. That's what I want for our country.
I know. Yeah. And to that point, I want to share this very quickly because these stats came out today from Business Insider Africa. It has Kigali rated number 2 as one of the most attractive cities in all of Africa. That news came out today. So I'm like, okay, I like that. Hope and I like attractive things.
I've been over there many times now. And one of the times I asked an individual, what would you want to tell Americans? This is a Rwandan. And the first thing he said is, and he was referencing the genocide, which underlying is this unity. He says, don't think it can't happen to you. In America, I think we all would say we could never do that. Yet we've had, but that's crazy. And the second thing he said was, you got to learn to forgive. And I think those two little lessons for me, it's like, how can you not learn those lessons from a country that went from arguably one of the worst situations to where they are today? I'm going to embrace that. So I think those are wonderful lessons that this individual shared. And actually, that's coming from a young man who's probably today in his mid-30s. He had to forgive his best friend's dad, or actually his best friend. He had to forgive him because his best friend's dad killed his dad in the genocide. That's the level of depth at which he gave that answer, essentially. Last question on Africa, and if you want to talk more, I've got some other questions. But so put on your wealth advisor hat. And look, I know because I talk to wealth advisors all across the country. You say invest in Africa, and there are knee-jerk reactions. I would just love your all perspective and be totally honest. When you hear, hey, potentially put part of your portfolio in Africa, how do you all think about that today, maybe differently than you did 3 years ago? Or, whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah. So I'll throw it out there. And of course, I always have to put in that fun disclosure of, right, this is no solicitation, right, and all the fun stuff that we know. This is really just my opinion, but... Which is why we're not talking about any funds, just Africa as a whole. As a whole. Yep. Absolutely. So here's what I will say as far as investor sentiment on the things that I'm hearing in the circles of rooms that, are really looking at Africa as a strategic play, right? So to your point, Africa now is, I mean, I would definitely say 2019 was a big year for, especially in the diaspora sort of community, where Black Americans started to really see Africa. It was like the 400 year anniversary, and and then it was just a big year of the return. So really, Ghana sort of kind of opened up the doors and says, come on, get over here. So it was really getting people excited, one, just to go visit and really touch the soil, get comfortable and familiar with the land, to now people saying, then COVID hits, okay, and then people are saying, I'm going to be a digital nomad and maybe go spend a little more time. And again, I think, getting through some of these like myths that had to be busted, and now saying, wait a minute, Africa could be a really unique place, strategic play, not just from a visiting and vacationing perspective, but truly building land and investing in infrastructure and being part of the next 100 years that is only set to be on the upside because of population growth that is happening by the second in Africa, right? The youngest population in the world is in Africa. The fastest growing population in the world is Africa, right? And so these are stats. And so, yeah, I mean. Yeah.
Hope, does anything stand out for you?
Yeah, to see it and to, I wouldn't even go as far as 3 years, but just the last year was my first time going on continent. And then, of course, most recently going back about a month or so ago, I see where Africa is really a place of investment opportunity beyond, many of us as Americans mostly see Africa as a philanthropic play. And I think that after I've gone there and I've seen when we talked, JaQ mentioned like that workforce, the young workforce and educated young workforce, it's really a place of opportunity. I would still say you need to go in with the mindset of having patient capital. I think there's still going to be some runway before it pops, but I think that this is, a very much a good time to be a part of this group of first movers that are really kind of looking into and understanding the investment opportunity in this space. And I honestly, I'm going to take that back to say first movers, because some of the first movement has already begun to see the infrastructure plays that have already kicked off in the continent, whether it's Rwanda, Kenya I was honestly surprised how developed both Rwanda and Kenya were. It's already begun, but I don't think it's popped. And so I think for those who are looking to say to diversify, that Africa is a great place to diversify, whether it's in the energy. There's still just, I say, when there's problems, those problems are opportunities with the right partnerships. With the right partnerships, there's opportunities to bring some solutions to the problems that are facing Africa, whether it's the lack of clean water, whether it's the lack of energy for 50% of the people, whether it's the lack of infrastructure and highways and bridges or manufacturing bases. I mean, those are all significant needs, but they're also investment opportunity.
I'm going to take us back. Well, I don't know. I would assume this will take you back at some point in your younger years, but obviously you all use capital in some form or fashion. I mean, obviously as wealth advisors, there's capital used every day. Hope and both you, I know Hope on a daily basis, or historically you've been on the nonprofit side as well. So when did you realize the power of capital, and what does that mean to you? And I'm purposely leaving that very broad and ambiguous so you can answer it however you want. But clearly you recognize the power of capital, because that's what you guys are now devoting at least part of your life to trying to figure out how to harness. So,
Hope, when did you realize the power of capital, and what does that mean to you?
Growing up in Detroit and driving down streets where you see houses with roofs sliding off and stick built, and every other block is missing a house, and there's just open fields, and there's unfortunate drunks in front of liquor stores, and there's liquor stores on every other block. That was probably when I first realized the lack of capital, right? And being around a community that just lacked everything when it came to infrastructure, services. I realized the power of capital when I go back to Detroit now, and I see where there's so much intentionality and there's a flow of capital. Some years back, I had made a trip to New York, to Brooklyn, and there was this billboard and it had two birds on it. It said, buy Detroit, period. That was probably about 15 years ago. After that campaign of folks saying, ooh, Detroit is cheap, let's get in, to see what has happened as that capital has flooded into this city has blown my mind. And I think it continues to blow everyone else's mind to see where there was a city that was at one point in time bankrupt to now to see where it's coming up on a complete renaissance, and they're doing, major world projects where we've got this new bridge, the Gordie Howe. That's the power of capital.
You've experienced in a very rich and tangible way. And I love the fact that that's what your life calling is, at some form or fashion, is leveraging that for the sake of others, for the sake of community. Jax, last question that we have time for is, what does stewardship mean to you?
For me, when I think of stewardship, I think of the responsibility that we have as fiduciaries to really make sure that we're directing capital accordingly, right? Whether, and so that's like the high level version, right? But then if we're being stewards for capital for impact investors, right? Being more specific, again, it's really making sure that we understand what does impact mean to that client? How do they really define that, both in the short and in the long term? As we talked about Africa earlier, Hope mentioned patient capital. That's the way I describe it, right? Like, as I get my clients to vision out 30, 40, 100 years, even when they're no longer probably going to be here in the physical, how do they want to see their legacy manifest both locally and globally? And so as I think about stewardship, I think about legacy. I think about the fact that to whom much is given, much is required. I think about the fact that it's a heavy responsibility when was it heavy is the crown, that I forget the saying, but you get where I'm going with this, right? It's like for those that understand the story of Joseph, how he was called to steward capital for King Pharaoh in Egypt because he was so gifted, but he was on assignment to make sure that things were properly stewarded, right? So stewardship is I believe it's a responsibility, it's a commitment, it's a calling. And I think there's, certain people that are called to be stewards and trustees, and really those that are really that I feel like the higher power, I'm going to say this, my God, that can trust. This says, okay, I can give you this, and I know that you're going to steward it properly so that, those people get energy. They get their homes, right? Lit up with energy. We're able to do the right work through the investments that we're making that are now changing lives for so many people, especially some of our brothers and sisters over there on the continent. And so that's exciting. That's stewardship. That's being obedient. That's not saying, oh, I got all this, all this capital and I'm hoarding it to myself and all I care about is IRR, right? IRR is fun. We want IRR, right? But the reality is that how are we able to still make sure, it's almost like people have their opinion about JD Rockefeller. I love him. But for me, I look at what he did with his life. He made a whole lot of money. And then towards the end of his life, he gave 90% of it back. He sold, and now his legacy lives on. He's 9-10 generations, his family. And so to me, like, it's when people live from that mindset of lack versus abundance, and when people understand it don't belong to you anyway, so steward it properly. And then look at God, he done took care of the Rockefellers, still going, and he been dead how many years? So anyway, I say all that to say that to me is stewardship. That to me is being obedient with your capital.
Well, I really appreciate both of you spending the time to share your story or stories. But I will say, as I process it, what was very clear to me is you all are bringing the intellectual rigor of an investment mindset, but clearly it comes through visually and through the microphones here. You're combining heart into that. And so I think back, Jack, to what you talk about going to Wall Street or going in, and what it lacked was the heart. And that's not saying everybody doesn't have heart there, but you realize you need both. You need the head and the heart into how capital is deployed. And if done well on the philanthropic side, as well as on the investing side, it can absolutely make a difference in people's lives. So thank you so much for coming. Don't forget to subscribe to A New Lens with CommonGood Capital on your podcast app of choice. Until next time, I'm Jeff Shafer. Hope, JaQ, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This podcast is a production of CommonGood Capital and does not constitute an offer or a solicitation of an offer. Such offer would only be made through a private placement memorandum. Prospective investors in private placement securities should be aware that making an investment is speculative and involves a high degree of risk, including the risk of losing all or a portion of an investment. Investments of this nature are illiquid and subject to substantial restrictions upon transferability.